Hello again. Today I'll be showing you the process of how I made my Springtrap doll. This latest entry in my Fredbear's series of Crypt Crits began life as a 3D sculpt that I then printed on one of my resin 3D printers. After a bit of sanding and polishing, I started by priming the model with black, and then start airbrushing highlights with white to create a zenithal highlight effect. This will allow me to pick out the details and also provides an easy start to shading. To accurately depict Springtrap's rotting skin, I begin by base coating the model with a Spring Bonnie-esque yellow. Now it's time to start ruining that yellow finish with some watered down green paint through the airbrush. I do this slowly and procedurally to gradually build up the green and leave a bit of the remaining yellow still visible underneath. Now I'm going in with watered down black paint mixed with a tad bit of green to start shading in those recesses. With the airbrush shading done, it's time to start base coating his dinged up nose. I'm being very delicate here to make sure I don't mess up the previous coat of paint. Nothing sucks worse than trying to colour match a hodgepodge creation you blasted through your airbrush, in a vain attempt to fix a little imperfection. We now take a detour from his botched nose to his pearly whites. I base coat these in a bone white-esque colour. Don't worry if it seems a little too clean, we'll be shading this down later. Speaking of which, I'm now applying a heavily watered down Agrax Earthshade wash from Games Workshop to the teeth. We want the teeth to look just as aged as the rest of his putrid face. Now it's time to start base coating his eyes. For this task I start with a medium grey. With the base coat nice and dried, I go in with a stippling brush and apply a lighter grey. In most artwork I see of Springtrap, he has very messed up, oily, chipped eyes, so I'm trying to replicate that effect here. Speaking of oily eyes, I'm applying a heavily watered down Nuln oil wash from Games Workshop to the eyes. Not only does that add that disgusting oil look to the eyes, it also blends the previous two coats of paint together. Since we're about ready to start shading with pastels now, I airbrush some varnish onto the model to seal in the paint. Once it's dried, I scrape off some pastel chalk shavings onto some sandpaper and use that as the palette. Using a makeup style brush, I personally use my Artis Opus dry brushes. I begin applying this powder in the crevices and all the edges that I want to be shaded on the model. As you can see here, it generally takes a few different passes over the same area to really establish the colour. This is mainly because I make sure I brush off most of the powder on the brush before I start applying it to the model. Otherwise, if you go in too heavy early on, yeah, good luck removing that. I mean, you can remove chalk pastel from a model with water generally, but I find it always leaves disgusting residue that you can never quite completely get rid of, and it's not fun. Thankfully, when working with a doll like Springtrap, we don't have to worry so much about staying clean and accurate. I think out of all the FNAF animatronic, Springtrap is definitely my favourite. There's something about that expression. There's nothing really overtly malicious about it, but it really carries an evil energy. But I guess that aesthetic is kind of easy to come by when you spend most of your day stuffing children in suits. After the shading, I apply one last coat of varnish and get started on the eyes. I designed a bunch of eye types in Photoshop, and then using a printout of these, I pick the Afton style eyes, dab a little bit of UV resin on there, and then apply a glass cabochon. Once I make sure the iris is sufficiently bubble free, I blast it with a small UV torch. This cures the resin, and once cut out, it's ready to be inserted. To attach the eyes, I dab a small amount of super glue into the socket, and then just pop that sucker in. To save him from depth perception issues, we handle the other eyes. And with that, the faceplate is done. Now we move on to the body. As with all my Crit style dolls, Springtrap begins as a repurposed old plush toy. I prep him by slicing off his face and tags. This particular doll actually features articulated arms and legs, so that should be fun. With all unnecessary extremities removed, it's time to start painting. When I paint the fur of the body, I always use a heavily watered down acrylic ink and water mixture. For the majority, I'd say it's a 10% ink and 90% water mixture. However, when I go for detail areas, I generally up the amount of acrylic ink. For example, the perimeter around the foot pads, or in this case the ear pads, I like to go in heavier to add more contrast. But right now I'm just spritzing a light coat over the entirety of the fur to get it nice and greened up. After a whole bunch of passes of that green, I start by going in with a slightly darker green to add to the grungy Gungeon Up aesthetic. I find it adds dimensions when there's different tones of green. As mentioned earlier, I am now airbrushing a almost black paint around detail areas such as the perimeter of the feet. Because we want Springtrap to look especially weathered and to tie all this colouring together, I also apply this black mixture to the rest of the doll. Now I'm just airbrushing in some highlight areas with a watered down yellow. Whilst we wait for the paint to dry, we can start assembling the claws. Just like the faceplate, the claws are 3D printed in resin, and I use PLA printed backing pins to fix them in. 3D printed resin can be dyed with alcohol ink, so that's what I use to colour them. As this doll features articulated limbs, it means that the limbs are separate from the rest of the body, meaning I had to slice open the arms in order to get those pins in, but no worries, we'll stitch that back up later. Right now I've stuck a pin in there and I'm slicing open a cut to push the end through. I spritz some superglue activator onto that pin, dab some superglue into the claw socket, and then push those two together. Now I just repeat that process for the 5 other claws. With the claws settled in place, it's time to re-stitch up that wound. I really hate sewing, but a quick ladder stitch handles this process nicely and cleanly. Well, at least I think it's a ladder stitch. I'm really not an expert. The last stage of the doll making process is to attach the faceplate to, well, the face. You may have noticed in the faceplate design there are holes around the perimeter of the face. This is so I can thread a zip tie through the fur and then thread that through the holes in the faceplate, join them up and securely hook the faceplate in. After snipping off the excess, I need to hide the ends of the zip ties. I do this by dabbing some hot glue on the ends and then pushing the fur over. To finish blending the fur into the faceplate, I use the same hot glue trick just around the perimeter of the faceplate and again push that fur in. I also use this hot glue trick in areas where I feel there is a somewhat bald spot of the doll. Think of it like Plushie hair plugs almost. And look, the evil entity is complete. Whoops.
I always come back.
You will not be spared. You will not be saved. I can taste the fear in your breath. It is time. Now you are mine.
Thanks for watching the video, guys. Please drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I have plenty more videos coming along just like this. In addition, if you'd like a doll of your very own, you can hit up the link in my description to my web store, where you'll find tons and tons of dolls readily available. Thanks for sticking to the end, and see you in the next one.